Welcome to the Reddit Chronicles. Today we will be reading from Petty Revenge. Our first post is by Queerdo. Quit my job at an upscale steakhouse, but not before making sure all the customers knew what a prick the owner was. I was waiting tables at an upscale steakhouse, and the company culture was absolute garbage. The owner, Gary, was constantly throwing tantrums and screaming at everyone, and we all hated him. He'd line us all up before every shift, just to berate us and yell how lucky we were that he'd hired us, because we were all bad at our jobs and no one else would ever have us, stuff like that. The only reason anyone ever stuck around was because the money was good due to the high ticket prices and solid customer base, as well as the fact that there weren't many other employment options for fine dining service in the area. In addition to being a massive prick, Gary was also a cheap bastard. There was this 6-foot-tall dessert cooler in the kitchen that had a broken door, and he put off fixing it for months because he didn't want to spend the money, so it was just sort of hanging on its hinge, and you had to be really careful opening it. Inevitably, during the height of a Saturday night rush, it fell completely off and hit one of the servers hard. So she's laying there on the kitchen floor, bleeding from a serious-looking wound on her head, and Gary is standing over her and screaming down at her, "Way to go, just brilliant. What the F am I supposed to do now? It's the middle of the rush, you've got a full section, and no one's going to be able to pick up your goddamn tables, because everyone who works here is useless and incompetent. You should have been more careful." I'd seen a lot of his BS, but this was the hard line, and I made a decision right then that I was out. So when I got home that night, I typed up a letter to Gary, telling him exactly why I was quitting and leaving no detail out when it came to his tantrums, his verbal abuse, and the hazards in the workplace that he wouldn't address. I printed out 30 copies, went in early for my opening shift the following day. Mid-afternoon, the place was only open for dinner, and hid them all over the restaurant where guests would find them, in the menus, under the napkins on the tables, in between paper towels in the restrooms, etc. Some were in really obscure places, so that they wouldn't be found right away and would keep popping up randomly, surprise, allowing my legacy to live on. Then, instead of working my shift, I left before the pre-shift lineup. Fast forward to a couple days later, when a coworker reached out and shared with me the beautiful details of Gary's head almost exploding with rage when he found out about the letters. A couple tables read them and walked out before ordering. People in the dining room could hear him screaming from the kitchen. Apparently they were still finding letters weeks later, and every time one surfaced, the vein in Gary's forehead would pop out and he'd disappear into his office and slam the door. It remains one of my proudest moments, and my only regret is that I couldn't be a fly on the wall watching this all unfold. Our next post is by Dandy Warlocks. Glitter bombs. For 10 years I worked in a very stressful job for 3.5 years. Towards the end, I had had some surgery and wasn't in a good headspace. I went into the back room one day and was sobbing. Well, apparently sobbing at work was unprofessional and should just get a Xanax prescription. Per the head of HR, I was off work on a mandated leave because of mental health issues when she called me to come in and tell me this. By the way, she also told me I was demoted and wanted to know how much the demotion was going to reduce my salary. I swear she was salivating when she said that. My manager at the time interrupted her and said, "No, Dandy Warlocks never took a raise when she took the position because she took the position at a favor to old boss, so she doesn't get a pay cut." Visible sad face on head of HR. I guess I was one of the higher paid people, IDK. Eventually I finally found a new job, was able to leave. This was 10+ years ago, and they checked credit scores at the time for jobs. Mine was still suffering from my divorce. But man, I could still remember the looks on her face when she told me that crying from the stress of the job was unprofessional and to go on Xanax. How she would hound me for every possible infraction but ignore the sexual harassment I reported. First, the company forgot to take my master key before my last day. So, on my last day, I saran-wrapped anything in all the management offices I could get into. Pens, keyboards, chairs, snacks, scissors, etc. I left the key inside several layers of said Satan wrap and left it in the offices before I left. Then, I waited. around the time the anonymous glitter bomb companies had started up. I didn't have a lot of money, but I set enough aside to send her a glittery package once a year or so, and to keep her from figuring out what the package envelope might contain, I used several different companies which each used different packaging. Sometimes I'd send those prank candles that started as vanilla but then turned to fart scent. I heard she got married, so I sent her one of those congratulations cards that you had to destroy to turn off. Later, a bear that had to be destroyed to stop singing on her anniversary. Then back to glitter, then cock lollipops. Edit, by cock I meant rooster. I never sent the actual NSFW cock, etc., no more than once a year, but on and off for 10 years. She retired, so I obviously stopped. They were sent to work, not home. And honestly, she probably doesn't even remember me. I don't think she ever figured out who did the glitter. To be honest, she pissed a lot of people off. Our next post is by Huge Buddy. Can't buy a homeless man a pizza? Fine by me. Back in the early 2000s, I worked at a well-known U.S. pizza delivery chain store. For anyone who has ever worked in the U.S. food service industry, you're probably familiar with what a failing dumpster fire of a restaurant looks like. On many nights, it was literally just me and one driver taking care of the whole restaurant. Breaks were out of the question because the restaurant would be completely unattended. The recent franchise buyers were complete and total idiots who would show up unannounced to yell at me, and the overwhelming majority of our customers ordered once and then never again. We had pizza deliveries taking 90+ minutes, people bringing them back to the store. It was a nightmare. And I got paid $8.50 per hour to run shifts. One night I was running a shift and it was particularly dead. Such nights were not uncommon, and they were basically the only reason I still worked there. Well, 11 p.m. rolls around as I'm kind of standing by the phones watching the clock tick down, and a clearly homeless man walks in. He introduces himself as Ricky and asks if we had any leftover pizzas that nobody picked up. I apologetically inform him that we didn't. He smiles and thanks me anyway, but then since I'm in such a good mood, I ask him what he wants. He says he likes the Meat Lover's pizza. Since he isn't a sociopath like some of our customers, I'm looking at you, Mr. Teriyaki Bacon and Sardines guy. I say I'll be happy to make him one. Ricky at this point is so thankful that he sits down in one of our chairs and starts bouncing up and down like a little kid. I put the order in and pay for it myself. It ends up being $12, or basically an hour and a half of work for me. Good deal in my mind. Ricky watches me and applauds my dough-slapping spinning skills. As the pizza comes out of the oven, in comes the area manager, the brother of the franchise owner. He begins shouting as usual and accuses me of stealing from the store. As he goes into his tirade, one of our few regulars, Henry, comes in. Henry hears the tirade and looks very uncomfortable. I finally tell the area manager that I paid for the pizza out of my own pocket. Area manager shouts a bit more, calls me a liar, says the count better be right that night, and leaves. I apologize to Henry and Ricky, who both tell me, an 18-year-old kid, yeah, work sucks, doesn't it? Ricky gets his pizza, Henry gets his, and they leave around the same time. I see them talking outside. The next night, Henry calls me for an order. This was unusual because he was generally a once-a-week guy. I also found it unusual that he ordered a Meat Lover's pizza instead of his usual Supreme. I took it, made it, and 20 minutes later, Henry calls again apologetically to cancel it. I say okay. In a bizarre coincidence, Ricky rolled in right around that time asking for a pizza. I just saw I had one that was going to go uneaten sitting under the heater, and so began the nightly dance. Henry would call, order a Meat Lover's pizza, and I'd make it. Henry would then call again, cancel, and Ricky would coincidentally roll in. Every night, same time. You could time it to the second. This went on for months. Eventually, the area manager caught wind because a bootlicker coworker of mine narsed on me, but I responded that I was just doing my job as instructed. They then stopped putting me into the schedule rotation in a quiet firing sort of way, but I really didn't care. The restaurant went under about a year later. Obviously, it wasn't all Henry, but I was glad to see it go. Our next post is by McDonald's Crewboy. Locked my ex out of his PlayStation account right after he renewed his subscription. When my ex and I broke up, he owed me about £1,500 as I paid off his credit card debt. We had agreed it would be repaid no matter what, even if we broke up. Well, shocker, that went out the window after I left him, as he claimed he couldn't afford to give me anything at all. Along with this, he kept almost all of our shared possessions and returned my TV to me broken and without any cables. The PlayStation was a gift from me when we had first got together, and he set up his new PlayStation account using my email address, and I hadn't thought about it since. Yesterday, I received an email informing me of my purchase of a PlayStation Plus year's subscription. I've logged into the account, set up two-factor authentication with my friend's number, and remotely signed out all devices. He's got me blocked on most platforms and vice versa, so I probably won't get to hear about it, but I'm still satisfied as hell. Thank you for listening to the Reddit Chronicles. Follow for more content.